Okay, so in this exercise, what I want you to do is shuffle the deck. If you're not too sure how to shuffle the deck, because I know new decks are difficult, there are a couple of ways in which you could do it. I tend to do it like this. You just want to make sure that they are super shuffled. You don't have to worry about mixing them so that some cards are upside down or not upside down, or if something falls out then just pop it back in. It doesn't really matter. You can shuffle it in ways where you can just put random packs down like that in random piles, you know, it doesn't matter how you shuffle them. You'll probably want to, when it comes to actually reading cards and stuff like that, you know, it's going to be a case of you'll want to do something that's easy. So if you can master some kind of shuffle whereby you can just do it in your hand as opposed to needing a workspace to do it, because you never know, you might be doing some sort of tarot reading or something like that out and about on the fly. You might not have anything that you can pop the cards down, or you may feel like just picking a card up at some point. So doing it at something like that, you don't need to be able to do it quickly. You know, eventually you'll get there, but at the moment you just want to make sure you just get a nice little selection of cards and do it. I know some people may not be able to do that, in which case just take random piles and then mix them around. You know, it doesn't matter. Whatever way you decide to shuffle the cards is the way you decide to shuffle the cards. It's just shuffling of cards. It doesn't matter and it doesn't mean anything. Some will say that it does, but I'd say no, it doesn't. So when we get them fully shuffled, what I want to do is I want to do the me and you exercise, which is basically, if you imagine, because there's essentially two of us, you who's watching this video and me this here, I'm going to pick one card for me and one card for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply what happens to me, what happens to you. So the first things that come into your mind, it doesn't have to be accurate. We're not going for accuracy right now. All we're going for is getting the flow of information when you're asked a question. None of these readings will be accurate. This isn't going to happen to you. This isn't going to happen to me. Just getting the free flow of information coming through. So if this happens to me, I'm going to be rather upset. You're crying. Maybe you're crying because I'm upset. I don't know. Happens to me, I get my heart broken. Happens to you, you get involved with an argument. These things don't necessarily need to mean anything or, you know, go together. It's just taking two separate stories, essentially a bit like the never-ending story, and melding them together. So these don't have to link on or link together. All it is just a case of you getting used to, when asked to come up with something, saying it. What happens to me? I sit down for the day and don't move. What happens to you? You've decided that you're going to sit down and not move. You're copying me. Stop it. What happens to me? I decide to retire. What happens to you? You decide to start working for the Roman Catholic Church. Happens to me? I end up setting myself on fire in the kitchen. What happens to you? You decide to start playing a musical instrument. Happens to me? I decide to start learning and paying money to learn how to joust. Jousting's like an old-fashioned... you can Google jousting. I expect you already know what it is. Anyway, let's not break the flow. What happens to you? You decide to go out and spend money and give money to a charity or a charitable cause, you know. Notice how I'm just going with what I'm seeing. I'm going with the card, the first things that pop into my mind. That's what you want to do. If you don't have your own cards, then you tell me now, based on what you can see here, what happens to me? What happens to you? What happens to me? What happens to you? In fact, you don't necessarily even need, if we go there, you don't even need to put them into two separate piles. If you wanted to, you could just put them into one pile. So what happens to me? Oops. What happens to you? What happens to me? What happens to you? Just do it quickly. What happens to me? What happens to you? What happens to me? What happens to you? Do that on and on and on, over and over and over and over again. And then when you're confident with doing that, we're going to do another exercise, which is basically very similar. We're just expanding on what we've already done. So if you start the new exercise, so what you're going to do is you're going to do what happens to me. I end up going to the zoo. What happens to you? You end up cooking and making wine. And then what we're going to do is expand on what we've already seen. So what you can do if you really do struggle, just stick to one story for now and just go the what happens to me or what happens to you. So for me, I decided to go to the zoo, and then I decided to enroll on a course, and it was backbreaking work. And then I ended up winning a trophy, and then, so, you know, you get the picture. It's just a case of what happens to you, blah, 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 blah. What this will do is if you get it right and you do it with two and you're lingering, what you're doing is you're keeping information from one story and information from a second story at the same time. Now this is super difficult, and this isn't a technique that you have to master per se, but it can be difficult to keep track of two different lines of information. And when you're doing a tarot reading, there might be lots of different themes coming up at once, and you need to kind of roughly keep track of what's going on or where the story is. You might have multiple stories. Clients very often will ask you one question, and then halfway through you answering it, they'll ask you another question, and then another, and then another, and it can be difficult to work out, okay, which question am I answering now? Something like this. Literally, we've got like the foundation card, so the what happens to me, I went to the zoo. What happens to you? You start cooking. And then just being used to swapping from one story to another, one story to another. So if that's my story, and I end up with my little trophy in that from working at the zoo, I can go back to your story then. So you're cooking, and then you decide to start doing the washing up, and then you decide to go off for a nice little walk in the garden because you deserve it, because you've done the washing up, and that's good. And then later you're going to a party. So basically, if you think of the exercise which we just did, of the what happens to me, what happens to you, what you're doing is you're expanding, a bit like the never-ending story, expanding on the story of each, but you're doing two at once. So what happens to me, I decide to plant a tree in the garden. What happens to you, you decide to get a new job. So in the garden, the tree eventually grows, and I decide to go and look at it. In your new job, you get a promotion. You're basically at the top, the head honcho. In the garden, looking at my tree, I decide that I might want to start growing some more trees. What happens to you after your promotion? You get another promotion. Wow, that's quite good, well done. What happens to me, winter's come and all of the trees and that seem to start, you know, shedding their leaves in autumn and shriveling up and that sort of thing. What happens to you after your next promotion? Well, sorry about that, something happens and you're the scapegoat and then you've lost your job. Yeah, sorry, don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. So after winter, I decide that I meet someone at the garden centre because I'm going to buy new plants and seeds. What What happens to you after you've lost the job? Well, you get into an argument with your husband and, well, it doesn't look very good. What happens to me after I've met this person? We go on a blind date. Oh, look, she's blind because she's got a blindfold on. What happens to you after your fight? Well, you decide to go to the job centre. What happens to me on my blind date? Well, I decide to take that person out again and drive this time. So I pick them up. What happens to you at the job centre? Well, you're looking around. You see, he's looking around for a job. So you're just carrying on and on and on. You're going through two different stories at once, and it can be difficult. If you end up messing it up, it doesn't matter. What you can do is just start again. So what happens to me? I decide to start a new job at a landscaping company. What happens to you? You decide to adopt an animal, a pet. What happens at my new job? Well, I end up getting pushed too much into the office and end up doing a lot of office work for the company that I work for. What happens to you with your new pet? Well, you turn into a mad cat lady and start adopting more and more and more pets, and you're just surrounded by them. You know, it doesn't matter. You just need to add more and more and more onto the story. So you've got two stories going on at once that are all leading on to each other. None of these stories are going to be applicable to you or me. That's not the point. The point is to get you being able to use these cards and to start making stories and having things appear to you in your unconscious mind. Now, I was able to do that quickly. So because of the never-ending story technique or the exercise of, you know, making stories over and over again, what you'll do is when you start to eventually apply and use your psychic ability to apply a question, eventually information relevant to that question will come through. But that's not important yet. We're just doing the exercise. So what happens to me, what happens to you? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be me and you. You can decide what happens to my mum, what happens to my dad, or what happens to my friend, what happens to me. You know, it doesn't matter. Now, at the moment, if they do come up upside down or anything like that, I just want you to turn them up the right way. There is such a thing as reversals and stuff like that, but we don't need to go into that detail at the moment. You don't necessarily need to do that at all, in fact, but we will cover it at some point, reversals of cards and stuff like that. Don't read into it too much, just add the story. Remember, what happens to me, what happens to you? That's all you're doing, is just adding these two stories that are running in parallel. So when you can do that confidently and do it without stuttering too much and getting confused and things, then move on to the next video and the next exercise.